Hey Lefty, I washed the car with the new sponge you bought, but it didn't soak up the water very well.
Sponge? What sponge?
You know, the big grey one.
Grey one? That wasn't a sponge, that was my cat!
No wonder. I thought it was awfully noisy for a sponge.
I suppose the next story is about a really scary sponge.
No, it's about some really scary aliens from another planet. It's called Teenage Sponge Boys from Outer Space. Want to know what the moral of the story is?
What?
Stay away from guys who wash dishes with their heads. Dirk and Deke are the alien sponge boys in this story. They're definitely a little soft in the head. But as Mac and Becky find out, the sponge boys can get very scary if they decide to put the squeeze on you.
Teenage Sponge Boys from Outer Space. Where on earth did this come from? Mum held up a chain with a small plastic ball dangling from the end. Uh-oh. I knew exactly where it came from. I also knew something else. I was in trouble. Again. I like taking things apart, just for fun. The problem is, I'm not very good at putting stuff back together. Sometimes I leave something out, like the chain with the ball that Mum was holding up. Okay, Mac, where does this come from? What did you destroy this time? Mum sighed. I'll put it back, Mum, when I get home from school, and it will be as good as new, I promise. What will be as good as new? She demanded. I grabbed my backpack from the kitchen table. The upstairs toilet. See you later. I raced out the door before she could start yelling. I hope she doesn't tell Dad about this, I thought, jogging down our path. I was still in trouble for taking apart the doorbell. Guess what? It doesn't ring anymore. I wish I was better at putting things back together again. I really do. But I guess it's just not my talent. That's the way I look at it, anyway. I glanced at my watch to see if I was late for school. I couldn't tell. The minute hand was missing. I had taken my watch apart last week. I ran to my friend Becky's house, just in case I was late. I pick up Becky every morning on the way to school. We're in the same 6th grade class. I like hanging out with Becky. She enjoys watching me taking things apart. She thinks it's cool. I guess that's why she's my best friend, but I have to tell you something. Becky is a little weird. Becky's mum answered the door. I walked in and headed straight for the den. Becky is always in the den. She's there in the morning before school. She's there in the afternoon after school. She'd spend the whole weekend there if her parents would let her. Why? Because that's where the TV is. And that's why Becky is weird. Don't get me wrong, it's not because she loves watching TV. I know lots of kids who love TV. It's because of what she watches. Come on, Becky, I think we're late for school. I can't leave now. Becky didn't turn to look at me. She brushed her long red hair back from her face. Her big green eyes remained on the 32-inch TV screen. It's time for the forecast. Becky loves the Weather Channel. She can watch it for hours and hours at a time until her eyes glaze over. Then she watches it some more. Weird, right? It's sunny and cool. Just stick your head out the window and you'll see, I told her. I know what the weather is here. She glanced away from the TV to roll her eyes at me. Then she quickly turned back. I've already heard local on the 8s. Local on the 8s? What's that? I asked. It's the local forecast, Mac. She rolled her eyes again. On the 8s, 8 minutes after the hour. Then 18 minutes after the hour. Then 28 minutes. Then 38 minutes. Then, okay, I get it, I said. Local on the 8s, accurate and dependable. Becky recited the Weather Channel slogan. Now I rolled my eyes. So why are you watching? What are you waiting for? The National Planner. What's that? I asked. Shh, it's coming on now. Becky moved to the edge of her couch, her gaze totally fixed on the TV. I watched too as the temperature for every major city in the United States slowly scrolled onto the screen in alphabetical order. Becky, they're only up to Denver. We don't have time to go through the whole country. We have to get to school. I grabbed her arm and pulled her off the couch. Becky slipped a dark green sweatshirt over her head, grabbed her backpack, and we took off. We must be really late, I glanced around. I didn't see anyone from our class. We always bump into someone we know on the way to school, but the street was deserted. We broke into a jog. As we neared the woods that grew behind the school, Becky started to run. "Hurry up, Mac! Mrs. Mormando will have a fit if we're late." She raced ahead of me. I put on some speed and caught up to her. "You know, it's your fault that we're late." "I'm sorry, but I have to watch the Weather Channel. What's here today could be gone tomorrow, but if you watch the Weather Channel, you'll always know what to expect." Sometimes Becky is really weird. "I can't wait until this weekend," she started. "A warm front is approaching from the Gulf." A deafening crash exploded in the woods. We stopped running. The ground quaked hard under our feet. Becky grabbed my arm to keep from falling. We stood that way for a few minutes until the ground stopped shaking. "Oh, wow," I took a deep breath. "What was that?" We made our way slowly through the trees. I had to find out what made that crash. Even though the sun was shining, the woods were dark. The branches grew thick and close together, and the fall leaves still clung to them, blocking out the sunlight. Some of my friends camp out in the woods in the summer, but I don't. I think the woods are kind of creepy. I led the way, ducking under low branches, pushing them up and away, peering through the old, gnarled trees, searching. "That's strange." I stopped. "Listen." Becky stood still, concentrating. "I don't hear anything," she said. "I know. That's what I mean. It's totally silent." I glanced up into the trees. I didn't see any birds perching on any branches, or hear their chirping. I didn't see any squirrels scampering on the limbs, or hear the leaves rustle in their path. Nothing. "We should turn back," Becky said. "We're going to be late for school." "Let's search a little longer," I insisted. Whatever made a crash that loud can't be hard to find. It's probably something big. We walked deeper into the woods. I couldn't find anything. "We have to go back," Becky declared. "Now." "Give me one more second." I started walking fast, darting between the trees, searching, finding nothing. I walked faster. Becky kept close behind me. Then I tripped over a tree root. I stumbled through the trees into a thick white cloud that billowed through the branches. Becky hurried up to me. The white cloud swirled around us, surrounding us. "That's funny. Local on the 8s. Didn't say anything about fog." Becky scratched her head, confused. "It's not fog, it's smoke," I told her. "We must be getting close. Come on." I raced up ahead. "Mac, we're definitely going to be late for school," she called after me. "I don't want to get in trouble. I'm heading back." Becky marched away. I heard her footsteps slowly fading, but I kept searching. "What crashed?" I wondered. "It has to be here somewhere." I zigzagged through the trees and stopped. "Becky, come back," I cried. "I found it." "What is it?" Becky came racing through the woods. "I don't know, it's over there." I pointed to the trees just ahead of me. I took a step forward, squinting at the large, dark object that stretched out underneath the trees. Becky marched right up to it. "Mac, you're not going to believe this." She reached down and picked up something from the ground. "What is it?" I ran up to her. "A pine cone, with its scales open," she declared. "So what?" I asked. "A pine cone with open scales means that we're going to have some nice weather." When the scales start to close up, it means that rain is on the way. I learned that on Weatherwise, a show on the Weather Channel. Isn't it cool? "Oh, yeah, really cool," I mumbled. "Well, it's more interesting than that." She pointed to the dark object under the trees. "That's just an old tent." I bent down for a close look. Becky was right. It was just an old canvas tent, half decayed, covered in a layer of thick moss. It was probably left there by one of my friends last summer, or the summer before. "Come on, we can't search anymore." Becky tugged me away. "We're really late now. We're going to be in major trouble." We crashed through the trees and ran full speed to school. When we reached our classroom, we peeked inside and saw Mrs. Mormando sitting at her desk, staring down, writing. We tiptoed to our seats in the middle of the classroom. We quietly sat down. Mrs. Mormando didn't glance up. She didn't see us sneak in. I gave Becky the thumbs up sign. Then I opened my notebook and Mrs. Mormando lifted her head from her work. "We all have jobs to do." She pushed her chair back. "And one of your jobs is to come to school on time." Uh-oh. "Now I want everyone who was late today to stand." Mrs. Mormando glanced around the room. We didn't stand. "I can wait." She crossed her arms in front of her. I know who the two of you are. Becky glanced at me. She knows. We'll have to stand, I whispered to her. She can't know, Becky whispered back. She didn't see us. She knows, I insisted. We have to stand or we'll be in bigger trouble. We stood up. I could see Becky's lower lip tremble slightly. Oh, I didn't know you were late too. Mrs. Mormando stared at me and Becky. Then she glanced past us to the back of the room. Huh? I turned around and saw the twins, Dirk and Deke, standing. Oh, brother, Becky was right. Mrs. Mormando didn't know. We gave ourselves up for nothing. The four of you will stay after class and write compositions on punctuality. Punctuality, she repeated the word. That means being on time. Dirk and Deke lowered their heads, embarrassed. I felt sorry for them. They were new in school. They just started in September. They didn't know how strict Mrs. Mormando is. I felt sorry for them for another reason too. Dirk and Deke were kind of nerdy and strange looking. They were really skinny and tall, taller than anyone else in the class. They looked like human string beans. I guess that's what made them look nerdy. Their skin made them look strange. It was very pale, whiter than chalk, and kind of bumpy. I didn't really know anything about Dirk and Deke. Nobody in class did. They were both shy. They hadn't made a single friend since they started here. And now they had to stay late after school. Bad break for them, I thought. And for us. Everyone, step up to the chalkboard, Mrs. Mormando interrupted my thoughts. I've written a math problem for each of you to solve. Problem is right, I mumbled, staring at the numbers on the board. I didn't know what to do. I stared at the example some more. I glanced next to me, at Becky. Her chalk squeaked across the board, fast. This is easy, she whispered, scribbling away. I watched Becky work on her problem, but I still didn't know how to figure out mine. I glanced away again, this time across the room, at Dirk. He wrote some numbers on the board. Then he leaned forward. He started to erase what he wrote, and I gasped. Dirk was erasing the board with his head. Dirk suddenly jerked his head away from the board. He turned to me. He saw me staring at him. He narrowed his eyes at me. His mouth turned down. He let out a low growl. I quickly turned away. I stared at the board in front of me, pretending to study the numbers, but all I could picture was Dirk erasing the board with his head. I stole another glance at him. He was writing again. He had chalk smeared across his forehead. That guy is really weird, I thought. I turned away quickly before he caught me staring at him again. Time's up, Mrs. Mormando announced. She checked our examples. Becky was the only one who solved the example correctly on my side of the room. On the other side of the room, Dirk and Deke were the only ones who got it right. I bet Dirk and Deke are really smart, Becky said to me on the way to lunch. Those guys are kind of strange, I said. I saw Dirk erasing the board. It's not strange to be good in math, Mac, Becky interrupted me. I think you're jealous of them. Jealous of them? You've got to be kidding. All I was trying to say is Dirk is a little strange. He was erasing the board. Strange, Becky interrupted me again. You like to take things apart. Some people might think you're strange. Did you ever think of that? We turned into the cafeteria. Becky sat down and threw her books on a table. I'll save our spots here, she said. It's your fault that we have to stay late today, so you get the drinks. I shook my head as I walked across the cafeteria to the food line. Sometimes Becky can be a real pain. I bought a hot dog and 2 cans of soda and started to make my way back to the table. Throw it, Becky called from across the room. She held her hands up, ready to catch the can of soda. I swung my arm back and aimed for Becky. The can slipped from my grip. Instead of sailing high across the room, it flew straight out in front of me. I inhaled sharply and watched with dread as it crashed right into Deke's skull. The can of soda hit Deke and bounced off his head. I stood frozen, waiting for him to cry out in pain, but he didn't cry out. He didn't even make a sound. He didn't utter a word. He didn't touch his head to see if he had a bump. He gave the can a casual glance as it crashed to the floor. Then he gazed up and glared at me. His face twisted into a deep scowl. Hey, Deke, I started to apologize, and the skin on his face tightened. The bumps on his cheeks popped out and turned bright red. I started to apologize again, but I changed my mind when Deke let out a low grunt. These guys are too weird, I thought. I walked away as fast as I could, but not too fast. I didn't want to look as if I was running. Did you see that, Becky? I dropped down next to her. My heart raced. Did you see the can of soda bounce off Deke? Yeah, she answered. He must have a really hard head. Can't you move a little faster? Becky walked a few steps ahead of me on our way home from school. We had stayed late after school to write our essays on punctuality. Becky was still annoyed with me. My fingers hurt from all that writing. She shook her hand. 10 pages of writing. Writing about why it's important to be on time. I already said I'm sorry. Can't we talk about something else? I pleaded. Becky didn't answer me, so we walked in silence. I saw a great program on TV the other night, she finally said. What is it? I asked, relieved that she was talking to me again. It was called Spring Fever and Other Weather Diseases. It was a special program on the Weather Channel. It was all about how the weather affects our bodies. Can't we talk about something else? I begged. No, she glared at me. I let out a sigh. Did you know the sun can make you sneeze? She went on. I nodded, yes. Even though I didn't know that, I wasn't even sure I believed it. Okay, did you know that a falling barometer can give you a headache? She asked. I didn't know a falling barometer could give me a headache. I did know Becky could. Sure, I lied. Everyone knows that. Did you know that your heart beats faster when the temperature drops quickly? Becky kept at it. Of course, I lied again. I don't believe you, she shouted. You did not know that. He doesn't know anything, I heard a voice in the woods. Dirk stepped out from behind a tree. Deke followed him. They blocked our path. That's not true, Becky said to them. Mac knows a lot of stuff. He just doesn't know anything about the weather or about math. Becky smiled at them. Dirk and Deke didn't smile back. They reached out and grabbed us. Dirk gripped my shoulder. Deke grabbed Becky by the arm. Hey, what are you doing? I cried. What's the big idea? Dirk and Deke didn't answer. They started walking, pulling us with them. I have to get home. Becky jerked her arm back, trying to yank free. Let me go. I twisted my shoulder, struggling to break Dirk's grip, but he clamped down harder, squeezing his fingers, tightening his hold on me. What are you doing? I yelled again. You'll see, Dirk growled. Real soon, Deke finished. Then they shoved us hard toward the tree and forced us into the woods. Dirk and Deke dragged us deep into the woods. We tried hard to wrestle free, but the skinny guys, they were strong. Too strong for us. We yelled and pleaded with them to let us go. They ignored our cries. Finally, they stopped and released us. Thanks for coming, Dirk laughed. His laugh sounded like the bray of a donkey. Ha ha ha. Deke laughed too. I'm getting out of here, Becky whispered to me. She turned and started to run, but Deke was fast. He took 2 strides on his long legs, stretched out a long arm, and caught her. You can't leave yet. His lips parted into a wide smile. We have to show you something. These guys were really strange and really creepy. We'll come back and see it another time, I said lamely. No, Dirk declared. We have to show you something now. He turned to Deke. Are you ready? Deke nodded. The 2 guys lifted their hands and placed them on the sides of their heads. Then they pressed their hands down and squeezed. Their heads were soft. They pushed some more, pushed on their mushy heads. I stared in shock as they squeezed and pinched and molded their skulls. As their heads shrank, their eyes moved in toward each other. Their noses sank into their faces. They pressed some more until they squeezed their heads into 2 tiny knots. Then they lifted their hands and boing! Their heads sprang back out. Their eyes slid back into place. Their noses popped out. Becky, did you see that? I cried. Becky's mouth hung open, but no words came out. How did you do that? I stammered. We're not from your planet, Dirk declared. We're sponge people. Yeah, very funny, I rolled my eyes. That wasn't a joke, Deke declared. Look. Deke led us behind some trees. He stopped in front of something hidden under a thick blanket of branches. I couldn't tell what was hiding under there. I could only tell that it was big. Dirk lifted up the branches and I gasped. A spaceship! A real spaceship! Shiny silver and shaped like a flying saucer. Whoa! I walked around it. It was the size of a small car with a circle of blue lights dotting its widest part. It was pretty banged up and badly dented. Some of the lights hung loose. Whoa! I walked around it again. Wow! I couldn't stop saying it. Whoa! A spaceship. These guys really were from another planet. What happened to it? Becky pointed to an enormous dent in the spaceship's side. We crash-landed on your planet, Deke explained. We're teenagers. We just got our intergalactic driver's licenses. I guess we were going too fast and we crashed here. Good thing we had airbags, Dirk added. We heard a loud crash this morning, Becky said. That was us, Dirk declared. We've been trying to get this thing to fly. We've been working on it for weeks, trying to fix it. This morning we tested it. We got up pretty high, then we crashed back down again. I listened to Dirk explain. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Aliens from outer space? And they had landed here in our little town. This was incredible. We had to tell everyone in school about this. No, wait, we had to tell the whole world. We don't want anyone to know about this, Dirk said as if he could read my mind. His eyes narrowed. We have to get off your planet. We're sponge life. Our bodies are too soft and squishy for your planet. If you don't want anyone to know about you, why are you telling us? I asked. Dirk stepped up in front of me. He lowered his big sponge head until it nearly touched my head. We need help to leave this planet. We went to your school to find kids who could help us. And we picked you because you were starting to figure things out. No, I wasn't. I stammered, backing away. Yes, you were. He stepped forward. I saw you staring at me in class today. He poked me hard in the chest and I stumbled backwards. You're smart. You were starting to figure things out. I could tell. Yeah, you're smart. Deke stepped up and shoved me. Too smart. Now you have to help us get back home. What if we don't help you? Becky asked. You'll help us, Dirk insisted. How can you be so sure? Becky pressed on. I watched in horror as the bumps on Dirk's skin turned bright red and his eyes bulged out. You'll help us, he growled, staring deep into Becky's eyes. You will. You will. I want to go home, Becky shivered in the October night air. I don't know why we're doing this. We don't have to help them. 3 days had passed since we'd discovered that Dirk and Deke were teenage sponge boys from outer space. 3 of the worst days of my life. Every afternoon after school, they forced us into the woods, forced us to work on their broken spaceship late into the night. We brought them nails, hammers, and food. We held up lights so they could work in the dark woods. They worked until the first rays of morning sun filtered through the trees. Then they let us go home. Every night, I had to sneak out of my house. Then every morning, sneak back in again before Mum and Dad got up. I was totally wrecked. I dragged my feet as Becky and I sneaked around to the back of the house. It was after midnight. Except for the low chirp of a single cricket, the night was silent. We headed quietly to the garage. I didn't want to wake Mum and Dad. They went to bed really late tonight. I nearly fell asleep waiting for them to conk out. But they finally did. Then I called Becky and told her it was safe to come over. We don't have to help them, Becky repeated. What can they do to us? I don't know, I whispered, and I don't want to find out. We're helping them, and that's that. They'll be gone soon, and we won't have to worry about them anymore. Soon? How soon is soon? Becky's voice grew louder. I haven't done my homework in 3 nights. I'm falling way behind in school. Soon? Better be real soon. What could I say? I felt the same way. I was way behind in my schoolwork too, and I kept falling asleep in class, but we had no choice. We had to help Dirk and Deke. I was afraid of them. I wanted them to leave, fast. And if that meant helping them, that's what I was going to do, even if I had to steal the battery out of my dad's car, which is exactly what I was going to do tonight. The Sponge Boys said their spaceship was ready for liftoff. They had everything they needed except for the power supply. I didn't know if the car battery would work in their spaceship. I wasn't sure if it could power their craft. I prayed it would. Then I could say goodbye to them forever. I lifted the garage door slowly. I raised it up inch by inch, careful not to make a sound. "It's too dark in here," Becky complained. "How are we supposed to see?" "No problem." I took a flashlight out of my back pocket. "Hold this while I lift the hood." I handed the light to Becky. I released the lock on the hood and it popped open. I felt around for the wrench in my other back pocket. Then I started to loosen the bolts that held the battery in place. "If your dad catches you doing this, you're going to be in major trouble," Becky warned. "Gee, thanks, Becky. I didn't realize that." Becky shrugged. "It's a good thing I'm great at taking things apart," I thought. I loosened the cables. "That should do it." I turned to Becky. "I'm ready to take the battery out. Here." I held the wrench out to Becky. She reached for it, but I let it go before she had it. It clanged loudly on the cement floor, and a light flashed on in my parents' bedroom. "Oh no," I moaned. "We're caught." Maybe they'll go back to bed. I stood frozen, staring at my parents' bedroom window, praying their lights would go out. The back porch light flashed on. I quickly lowered the car hood. Becky ducked behind a fender. "Don't let him see me," she whispered. "I don't want to get in trouble too." "Who's out there?" Dad demanded, poking his head out the back door. It's just us," I answered. "Just Becky and me." Becky kicked me in the leg as she stood up. "What on earth are you doing out here?" "Do you know what time it is?" Dad asked. "Becky, do your parents know you're out this late?" Her parents know," I answered. "They said it's okay because we're doing our astronomy homework." "Yeah," Becky added. "We have to draw a star chart." Dad gazed up into the night sky. "How are you going to do that? Look at all those heavy clouds. You can't see a single star shining out there tonight." "We know," I said quickly. "Our teacher told us to use our imagination." "Well, you should have told me you were going to be out so late," Dad said. "You scared your mum and me to death." "Sorry, Dad. I didn't remember the assignment until it was too late. You and Mum were already asleep. I'm really sorry." "Okay, but don't stay out too much longer." He went back inside. I stared up at my parents' bedroom, waiting for Dad to shut off the light. As soon as it went out, I carefully lifted the hood of the car. I reached inside for the battery. I tried to lift it, but I couldn't. "I need help, Becky. The battery is rusted in place. It's stuck." "How am I supposed to help if I have to hold the light?" she asked. "Becky." "This is stupid," she grumbled. "I'm tired of working day and night. I'm never going to help you again." She tucked the flashlight under her arm and reached into the car. "You won't have to help me again," I told her as we tugged on the battery. "When my dad sees the battery missing, he'll probably kill me." We tugged, and the battery finally came loose. Becky closed the garage door, and we headed for the woods to meet the Sponge Boys. It was cold in the woods, cold and damp, and dark. No stars shone above, no moonbeams filtered through the trees. The heavy clouds blocked out any twinkle of light. Becky swept the flashlight beam in front of us so we could find our way. A wind picked up, it whistled through the trees. I shivered. What if the battery doesn't work? A chill swept through my whole body. What if the Sponge Boys put it in their spaceship and nothing happens? What will they do to us? "What took you so long?" Dirk scowled at me. He and Deke stood beside the spaceship. A battery-powered lamp that I borrowed from Dad hung over the branch. Dirk and Deke stood in the bright circle of light. They looked really creepy in the yellow beam. The bumps in their skin appeared larger and took on a greenish glow. But the spaceship looked awesome. Dirk and Deke had knocked out all the bangs and dents, and Becky and I had really shined it up. It sparkled. The battery was stuck. My voice sounded loud in the still of the night. "And my dad caught us," I whispered. "You didn't tell him about us, did you?" Deke asked, moving in on me. "Of course he didn't," Becky declared. "Here, take this." She grabbed the battery out of my hands and shoved it into Deke's chest. Deke stumbled backwards. Dirk took the battery. "Now you have what you want." Becky planted her hands on her waist. "So let us go. I have to get some sleep tonight." "Sorry, we can't let you go." Dirk stared down at the battery in his hands. I've never seen a power supply like this one before. You're going to have to hook it up. No problem, Becky said. Mac will do it. Uh-oh. I can't, I stammered. Just do it, Mac, so we can get out of here, Becky declared. I'm tired. Deke grabbed me tightly by the shoulders. He breathed in my face, and I nearly gagged from the smell of his sour breath. Put in the power source or you'll never sleep again. He shook my shoulders hard. You don't understand, I tried to explain. I'm not very good at putting things together. I never do it right. Our toilet still doesn't flush. What's a toilet? Deke asked me. Well, it's, Stop wasting time, Dirk cut me off. Put this thing in or else. Or else what? Becky asked. I'm tired of all your threats. I'm tired of you bossing us around. Or else what? She demanded. I wanted to strangle Becky. I watched in fear as Dirk's eyes narrowed into two tiny slits. He placed the battery on the ground. My heart began to pound as he straightened up and reached out for me. He grabbed my hand and jerked it roughly toward him. Then he wrapped his fingers around mine. He closed his eyes and squeezed his fingers tightly. He squeezed my hand so hard his knuckles started to turn white. I waited to feel the pain. I waited for it to shoot through my hand and up my arm. But I didn't feel anything. I glanced over at Becky and shrugged my shoulders. Dirk uncurled his fingers. A slow smile spread across his lips. Look, he said, gazing at my hand. I glanced down and screamed. I'm a sponge, I cried out in horror. He turned my fingers into sponges. I raised my hand and watched my fingers flop in the air. I touched them. My skin didn't feel like skin. My bones were gone. My fingers felt soft and squishy, like sponges. Oh, I let out a low moan of terror. Becky rushed over to me. She squeezed my hand, my wrist. They were still solid. If you don't help us, I won't stop at your fingers. Dirk turned to Becky, or yours. Then he reached out for my head. Okay, I yelped. We'll help you, but please turn my fingers back. I'll need them to work. Please. Dirk clapped his hands twice sharply. They're back, he announced. I glanced down. I wiggled my fingers. They didn't flop around. They were solid again. I lifted the battery from the ground and slowly approached the spaceship. So where does it go exactly? In here, Dirk opened a hatch on the side of the ship. Hundreds of colored wires and cables sprang out. Oh boy, I am in big trouble, I thought as I studied the wiring. If this were a car, I'd have a problem putting the battery back in, and this was nothing like a car. Beads of sweat formed on my forehead as I tried to figure out what to do. Becky sat against a tree, staring up through the branches. Dirk and Deke stood behind me, watching me. I inched forward away from them. I didn't want either one of them to touch me, even by accident. I stared into the hatch. Here goes, I thought. I connected half of the wires and cables to one side of the battery and the other half to the other side. All done, I said. Great, Becky jumped up from the ground. Let's go. Have a nice trip. She grabbed my hand and started to tug me away. Not yet, Dirk's voice boomed through the night. We froze. First, you have to help us with the final inspection, he ordered. His voice softened. And you want to watch us blast off, don't you? I didn't want to be anywhere near here when the Sponge Boys tried to take off. But I knew Dirk wasn't really giving us a choice. I let out a sigh. Sure. Becky and I took a seat in the spaceship. Wow, look at all the switches and lights. I stared at the control panel in awe. I'd never seen so many gadgets in such a small space. It was amazing. Dirk and Deke told us which switches to flip, then they checked the outside lights and the wiring in the hatch. Okay, I think we're ready, I heard Dirk tell Deke. Becky and I stood up. Oh, we almost forgot, Dirk said, moving toward us. Stop, I cried. Don't turn us into sponges, please. We're not going to do that, Dirk replied. You helped us. You're our friends. There's just one thing we forgot to mention. What's that? Becky asked. We're taking you with us, he answered. No way. No, you're not. I jumped out of the spaceship. Becky leaped out too. We tried to run, but the Sponge Boys blocked our path. Get out of our way, Becky demanded. We helped you. Now let us go. Sorry, Dirk replied, but you're coming with us. We can't leave you behind to tell everyone about our visit. get inside, Deke ordered. Have you ever flown in outer space? Becky and I shook our heads no. Don't you want to be the first kids on Earth to fly in a spaceship? He asked. Becky and I shook our heads no. Even if I let you work the controls? He added. We can't do that, I said. We don't have our intergalactic driver's license. That's okay, Deke waved a hand in the air. We don't, either. We lied to you about that. We just have our learner's permits. Enough talk. You're going with us, Dirk shouted. So get in. Dirk and Deke shoved us toward the spaceship. They pushed us hard, trying to force us inside. No, wait. My shoelace is untied. Becky bent down to tie a sneaker. Mag, can you help me with this? I have a knot. She's totally lost her mind, I thought. How can she worry about a knot at a time like this? I leaned over Becky's sneaker. I didn't see a knot. Becky moved her head close to mine and whispered in my ear, Stall them. Don't let them get in the ship. Huh? Why? Just stall them, she whispered, then she stood up. Thanks, Mac, that's better. She turned to the sponge boys. I hate knots in my laces, don't you? Deke let out a short grunt. Are you ready? Dirk snapped. Almost, I said, but first I have to stretch. I'm not good at sitting in one spot for a long time, and this is going to be a long ride, right? Dirk and Deke nodded. Well then, I'd better stretch, so my muscles don't get cramped. Me too, Becky said. Becky and I faced each other. Ready? Begin. I started doing jumping jacks. Becky followed along. Okay now, hands on hips and bend. Bend. Becky and I dipped from side to side. Touch your toes, 4 8 counts, here goes. I cheered, and we touched our toes up and down 8 times. The sponge boys leaned against a tree, watching us. Dirk let out a loud grunt. Why don't you join us, I suggested. Yeah, Becky said, you should stretch your muscles before such a long flight. Okay, time to raise our arms high, I said, lifting my hands over my head. Stretch, stretch. Becky stretched her arms way up. Stretch it out, reach for the moon. That's enough. Dirk moved away from the tree. Enough stretching, get inside now, he pointed to the spaceship. We've got to keep them here, Becky whispered to me, just a little longer. It's no use, Becky, my voice trembled. I can't stall anymore. I don't know what else to do. No more fooling around. Deke guided Becky and me to the spaceship. It's time to go. Okay, we're ready, Becky said. Just one more minute. We want to say goodbye to Earth. Becky stared at the branches overhead. Goodbye trees, goodbye leaves, goodbye woods. Goodbye rocks, goodbye dirt, I added. Goodbye school, goodbye Mrs. Morando, goodbye homework, she went on. Goodbye Mum, I continued, goodbye Dad. A lightning bolt exploded in the dark sky. I could see Becky smile in the bright flash. A clap of thunder boomed. It started to rain. I felt a few light drops on my face, then another flash of lightning, and it started to pour. We were drenched in seconds. I knew it, Becky cheered. I knew it would rain. I knew those were stratocumulus clouds. Huh? Stratocumulus clouds, rain clouds, she told me. Oh no, the sponge boys moaned. The rain, stop, stop. Dirk cried out, clutching his head. We watched in amazement as the sponge boys' heads soaked up the rain and began to swell. The more it rained, the larger their heads grew. Can't think, Deke groaned. His head had swelled to the size of a watermelon. Can't move. Dirk collapsed to the ground, clutching his melon-sized head. You're a genius, Becky, I cheered. I knew if we just kept them here long enough. Becky stared up at the sky. We'd better get rid of them now before the rain stops and they dry up. We hoisted up the sponge boys, one at a time, and shoved them into their spaceship. I reached over the control panel. I turned on the ignition. I slammed the top hatch shut. The spaceship began to rumble. A thin stream of grey smoke escaped from the bottom. Then its blue lights flashed on. I held my breath as the spaceship shook on the ground from side to side. Boom! With a loud roar, the ship lifted off the ground. It flew straight up above the treetops. The rain poured down on our faces as Becky and I stood and watched the ship soar up. Soon its blue lights grew faint and it disappeared into the dark clouds. "We did it," I cheered. "We got rid of Dirk and Deke." I jumped up and down, twisting left and right, swinging my arms high in the air. I was so happy. Becky ran circles around the trees, whooping and hollering. I glanced up at the sky one last time before we left the woods. It was totally dark. "Come on, Becky, let's go home." Becky guided us through the woods with the beam of our flashlight. We ran through the trees as fast as we could and burst out onto the street. We didn't stop running until we reached my house. "Bye." Becky took off for her house. I slipped quietly in through our back door and met Mum in the kitchen. "Mac, I was just coming out to get you. It's really late. Did you finish your astronomy homework?" "Yes," I cheered. "We finished." I was so happy. The Sponge Boys were gone for good. "What's that?" Mum pointed to a shiny bolt I held in my hand. Oh, I stared down at it. I didn't even realize I had been holding it. A bolt from the spaceship. "It's nothing," I told Mum. I tossed the bolt into the trash, just as a bright blue light came swooping down through the kitchen window. Then we heard a deafening crash from out in the woods. "Oh no," I moaned. I stared at the bolt at the bottom of the trash can. "Oh no."